Hello. Let me just get the PowerPoint up. I don't know if you've seen the exhibition or you're coming to the opening, but the exhibition was an Arts Council funded exhibition, an Arts Council project grant. The archive invited me to work with them because of my history of painting fairground, landscapes and tents. There was a lot of engagement in the project with Sheldon and Bob Chase and others, which will be on the panel as well. And I think I really focused a lot on engagement as to why archives remain active, why they're still a valuable source, why we spend resources on keeping them cool and air conditioned, and preserving history and what it means to a contemporary audience and how a contemporary audience engages with it and how you can peel back through the layers of time to find relevant stories today. And also for the creation of new archive material. So I'm going to do a stunt of talking very quickly and loudly because a lot of what this presentation is about giving Sheldon time to talk. Sheldon's a sixth generation showman and he has a lot of information and conversation about showman identity, and me and Sheldon spoke a lot about landscape for me as a landscape painter. Bob's a photographer who took photographs of showmen in the 70s, so they're included in the exhibition. So when you get a chance to look at the exhibition, you can see their work. But what I'm going to do very quickly is to see how I responded, explain how I responded to engaging with them and their content. I'm going to turn the camera around, so unfortunately for the viewers at home, they just get to see me. So I originally discovered Bob's archive right at the beginning of the project. The project started in 2022 in July, and I think Bob had only donated his archive, his collection, earlier that year. And it's these collection of photographs from 78-79 at the King's Lynn Mart, which is the earliest fair in the season, but also a really ancient historical fair. When I attended, it was the 818th fair. But it was this particular set of photographs when there was very heavy snows. It starts on February the 14th every year on Valentine's Day, and that's whether it's snowing or not. So it's these really interesting monochrome images of showmen working in the snow, and then these kind of converse images of nighttime and later on in the season, because Bob photographed at a number of places of the fair at night and how structures loom out at night and the light, and it's like a reverse negative really. So in these daytime scenes, there's kind of darkness amongst the snow and then light emerging. So I kind of developed a real interest in Bob's photographs really early on in the project. The archive put me in touch with Bob, which was brilliant, because then we had conversations and we decided to go back to visit King's Lynn. To see if we could find any of the showmen in the pictures, to revisit the site. Bob himself is from King's Lynn, he grew up in King's Lynn, he saw the fair every year and also has showman connections within his family. So the King's Lynn Corn Exchange really kindly offered us a space to screen the photographs in Bob's collection, which are also in the digital archive. So we had them all digitally scanned by the Fairground archive. So we brought them. We attended the week before during the build-up of the fair. That's me handing out nice leaflets, promoting the project to showmen. Showmen are extraordinarily busy at this time because it's the biggest start to the season. They really just thinking about income and making the fair work. So it was quite a big ask even to get 5 minutes to just come in and view these photos. So promoting it beforehand. We had the screening and it was really wonderful. There's a picture of me with some showmen who found themselves in the photograph, their aunties, grandparents. Another showman found pictures of his dad who he hadn't seen. His dad had died when he was 6, and he found photos of his dad he'd never seen. So it was this wonderful idea of a living archive. So when you have an archive and breathe life into it, and it becomes active and relevant to people living today. So Bob set up a QR code, he set up a Google Drive which showmen could scan on the day and start adding information. So on the day Bob and I were collecting, and Moira, Bob's partner, and we'd hear names. So there's me going Rabbit. So that was the nickname of this particular worker, not a showman. Showman often hired workers as well to help them build the fair up. But then Jolie Remblance, who has added a lot of information to the photographs, knew his name. So this new archive, this modern digital archive on Google Drive, has been updated and continues to update. I check on it and see what's going on. So John Green, he was someone I found in the archive. He saw this little picture of himself and his sister. He was really excited to see that, remembered the day, remembered how heavy that one-armed bandit was, and really nice again that Jolie's come back and remembered it was Alfred Green's arcade. So this is John today. A picture I took of him. He had two rides at a stall at King's Lynn Mart. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to play a really brief interview with him, because during this period I did recorded interviews with showmen to bring into the archive. All of this will be new archival content. But on the next slide I'm showing a film by Ted Dandridge, which is in the Vic King collection. Vic King is a kind of enthusiast of rides, and he collected films made by other amateur filmmakers. And quite interesting, because that's my viewpoint in the structures of the fair, and interesting that they come into colour. Bob will tell you about why he chooses to photograph in black and white when he speaks. So this should work.
John Green, I've been on the Mart, I would say now, all my life. The photographs was very good because it took me back to my childhood, and sometimes you forget a lot of things and also a lot of people, and there's photographs there, God bless the souls, there's a lot of people who's gone, and just seeing the photographs reminds you of a good childhood I had at the time. Showman's history should always be supported and looked after, because I'm the fourth generation in my family to come to the King's Lynn Mart. With luck, my boy is here as well, so he's like the fifth generation. And there's not many families or firms what can go down that line in generations. Working today is a lot harder, more stressful, because before it was more like a family all working together, and now everybody's got their own stresses because the price of everything, and you've got to try and keep everything down so people visit the fair. It's just a special way of life. It's very hard for people to get into showmanship because it's the hours is very different to anybody else's. Most people 9 till 5, and we're sometimes 7 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock in the morning again. You know, you just can't tell. But it is a good life. John Green.
John's lovely. I like the way he's jangling coins through the entire interview. He's got his penny slots. So then, going back to Bob's photographs, Bob was really interested in the people operating in the fairs and the living wagons, and I was really interested in this world within a world, a home within another world, a transient world in which there's a home, and how the living wagons form part of that transient world. And Bob will tell you more about that. But also in the exhibition today, I was really interested in showing Bob's original photographs that he printed for his exhibition, and how they're mounted, and linking them with the Sanger family collection and their own pictures of living wagons, and then being mounted. There's a real physicality of the archival object that I was interested in. You know, very much when you see Bob's photos, they speak of the 70s on glossy card and rounded corners, and these pictures from the Sanger family collection from the 1880s. You know, one of the biggest show families, historically biggest show families, and trying to make that link through the physicality of the archival object and that connection with that history which still moves. You know, and I trace the Sanger family all through the collection. Also, when I work with archives, I'm always looking for kind of these little sprites or shapeshifters, a kind of repeated motif that appears through the decades, and there's a continuity of history through this symbol. So again, I saw Bob's, this photo on the left of Bob's, of the gallopers being taken down, and this kind of vulnerability of this this horse that usually we're gliding on, and it's moving around the circus, moving around the fairground, and then how vulnerable it is being deconstructed. This is another Vic King film of some gallopers being removed from storage to go down to the Dingles Fairground Heritage Museum, and that kind of angry looking galloper. So it's really just seeing that motif moving through the archive. Again, this postcard I love, which I put in the show, of the donkey as a weather barometer sent to a donkey dealer or the Dobsons, who use donkeys as part of their fair. And John Sanger, who was from the Living Wagon, that history, he was into horse racing, gambling, betting, but he had all these beautiful diaries where he'd have betting odds, but also weather, rain. He noted the weather on every single day through these stacks of diaries, and that's a reminder of how important that is to showmen and how it can make the difference between an income in the fair, setting up the fair, and how important it is to these lives. So this is really just a direct way I work with archives, through drawing and this transitional phase that goes through drawing. So this is Bob's photograph of Donald Prince's flying coaster, again in these snow pictures, and it becomes something completely other. You know, at the fair it would be bright colours, it would be large, it would be standing over you, and now it looks like this strange mythical object in the fair, in the snow. And I tend to work a lot with shrines in some of my paintings, so this is a kind of transitional drawing, turning that into something else, which I'll talk about later. And only fair to show Donald Prince whose ride it is, but then you can see the scale of it looming over him. And I love that every ride has a name attached to it, you know, but we'll talk about that with Sheldon. So this is the King's Lynn Mart 2023, when me and Bob went down. This is quickly how I work. Again, with paintings, my paintings are very layered, and they come from different histories. So I've dealt with the monochrome from Bob's work and photography, and the New to Garda ride, and this layering of history, and considering this layering of history on the site. As I say, it was the 818th King's Lynn Mart, and that site has been walked upon, lived upon. You know, the showmen have been coming there for hundreds and hundreds of years, so it's really thinking about both the weight of that history and the lightness of the showman's life, because they can be gone the next day. Very quickly, I keep saying quickly, Nipper Appleton and Lawrence Appleton from Bob's photographs. Again, I was lucky enough to be hanging around a bar and met Lawrence and Nipper. That's what the Arts Council fund. But no, we really lovely interview with Lawrence. He was the chief operator. He'd just become Nipper, the chief operator at King's Lynn Mart 2023. And he has Ghost Train, and I traced his Ghost Train through the National Fairground archives. So many different iterations of it, different years. They change every, different seasons to go with culture, what's fashionable. There was a really nice undersea world one I found from the 80s, and I really remember Under the Sea being very popular at that time. And this is how I work, and using different source material and creating these new spaces for the rides and for the worlds that I then go on to create in my work. And these are all in the exhibition, so you'll see them. And so finally, this is one of Bob's photos taken at this King's Lynn Mart 2023. And you can see that although these rides are big, they're hydraulic, they're a lot easier to install, to build up, but actually there's still these beautiful poses of push, pull, and the physicality of it. And that's a father and son, John Birch and son, and this is John's rides that he has. So he has the traditional waltzer, but then this new extreme ride, which was very exciting. So what I'm going to do now is quickly put Bob's presentation, quickly. And I'll let Bob talk to you about his practice, the project that I've referred to.
How long have I got?
You have got, how long, when are we up to, Aranza?
20 minutes.
You've got about 20 minutes, because we're started a bit late anyway. Yeah.
Joanna, thank you very much. The display, which is, I just had a few minutes looking up there, and it's my first encounter with the exhibition. It's rich and deep and deserves some time and multi-layered. And of course, to say right at the start, that it's quite a moving day for me. I'm not a photographer anymore. I was obsessed with photography from when I was about 12 to when I was about 22. And these photographs, for that period, I thought I might have taken some reasonable pictures. I might have taken some good pictures. But they didn't really have a life after being used in my final exhibition. They literally, and I'll show you, they went into a cardboard box, they went into a suitcase and weren't seen again for 40 years and more. And but to see them now being used, being shown, being appreciated is really moving for me, actually. And so I feel quite honoured about that. So I'm going to just show you the this one, right? This one. This keyboard,
Yes,
not that keyboard. I haven't upset anything.
Use the
I'm going to sort of tell you about this, my component of it. How this came, how these photographs came to be, and there's a little bit of a story there of how this happens. So I was taking photographs, as Joanna's already mentioned. I grew up in Kings Lynn, family on my father's side of fishermen, and all my family lived in the town. I knew, I used to be taken to the Mart when I was, early enough to walk. It was a big event for the town. I'm not saying that Kings Lynn is dull, but when the Mart came around, it livened the centre of the town up, and it was fantastic. So it was very memorable as a child. And just to prove it, here's a photograph of me in a very unflattering position, actually, with the camera I'd saved up for a whole summer working in a camera shop to buy. And my friend Kevin, who was my co-conspirator and photographer in Kings Lynn, took that photograph. So there's me looking moody, a picture taken by Kevin as well. So this was just before I went to technical college. I knew at that time I wanted to study photography, and I'd chosen a course already at Harrow School of Photography, the art school in Harrow, and that's where I was going to go, and I knew I was going to go there from when I was 14. Did my A-levels at the local technical college in Kings Lynn, which I didn't excel at, but I did well enough, or I managed to convince the people at Harrow School of Photography to take me on as photographer, as a student there. And so there's me looking, trying to be a cool 1970s photographer, and I'd got to be, where I wanted to be at Harrow College. Just a little bit about, during your talk it made me think that you talked about, these photographs and the way they were mounted are like the 1970s. And I was thinking, that's right, isn't it? What were the stunning images around? What was I influenced by in the 1970s? And it was by photographers like these. Now, Bill Brand is not a 1970s photographer, but he's somebody whose work I knew of at that time. His black and white photographs of the aristocracy in London, but also in the north, Grimont North. These wonderful black and white photographs taken with wide-angle plate cameras at that time. And then Bruce Davidson was an American photographer who was shooting here in the 1960s and producing these, what for me were kind of poetic, dramatic, monochrome images that had such a lot of power and depth. And I wanted to take photographs like that, essentially, and tried my best to. Because I was living I grew up in Norfolk. I had connections there. I wanted to take photographs of what was happening around me, work that was happening. So here's a couple of pictures, one in the local canning factory, and I actually worked in the canning factory during the summers while I was at photography college to earn enough to buy cameras and films and whatever to be a photographer. The picture on the right is, I have family connections into the fishing business, I've already said, and this is in the middle of the wash. I went out on fishing boats taking photographs at that time. So it was this interest in not being a wedding photographer, not being a food photographer, but being inspired by people like Cartier-Bresson, street photography, using small, not using flash, using small 35mm cameras. Nikons were available at that time. Some of you may know the religious or Catholics, some of you may know about the Walsingham Shrine in Norfolk. So I did a project there, stayed for several days, visited, and was taking photographs of people coming along to that. And so you can see here this, using this kind of high contrast black and white, taking film that was pushed so that I could, means it was more sensitive to light, and I could take photographs without flash in these circumstances. So what have we got next? Another photography that inspired me at that time, and there was a collection of people, but Chris Killip, a British photographer at that time, was taking photographs of communities. You know, we were looking at the end of the 1970s, the kind of economically quite difficult. It was just pre-Thatcherism that was happening, and there was, you know, a lot of traditional industries around the country were getting sort of you know, crushed, and it was a difficult time. So I almost took as a manifesto his kind of words about immortalising people, about celebrating context that people were you know, living and working in. So, you know, the 1960s, swinging 60s photographers with you know, David Bailey's with their models and all the rest of it was happening. But also there was a politicization going on. I think across the arts at that time, people were saying, who am I taking photographs for? Where are they being used? For what purpose are they, you know, these photographs being used? So the Grunwick strike was on around at that time, and students, photography students like me, got involved to support the workers at that photographic business who were on strike, the young Asian women who were involved. So I suppose I'm trying to set in, for me, the context of these photographs. I wanted my photography to be engaged, to be worth something. So as I said already, I was already photographing showmen. I had some contacts into that area. So there was something that was, for me, visually fascinating, a world apart. And I chose that area and approached people in the Showman's Guild, people I had contact with, to see if I could get a bit of a passport in, you know, rather than walk up to a fair and say, hey, can I come into your living wagon and take pictures? It was to get some legitimacy from the Showman's Guild, from people who would refer me, who would say, yeah, this guy's okay, he's sound, you can trust him, and take these photographs. So, so I did get some support at that time. The bigger idea, just to share with you, was I not only wanted to just go in and take photographs like a photojournalist. In fact, was somebody from the Gray family in Norwich said, "Why don't you build a booth and travel with us? Why don't you actually put your photographs, this exhibition, and take it on wheels so that people can, you know, come into it. They can see our fair, but then they can come and understand something about us, see something about us." And so I tried to get some money from the Arts Council. They're not interested. I'm 20 years old. They don't know who the hell I am, what this is about. Crazy idea. Didn't get any money for it. But I built the booth anyway for my final year exhibition. So with the help of my older brother, the idea was to build this booth, and it would be a small experience of the fairground. You'd go in through a door, and there would be the bright lights and music of the fairground, and then you would pass through that to, if you like, the kind of what I saw as a kind of monochrome reality afterwards. And just quickly, these are some of the colour images that I shot, colour 35mm film. And I was using, at that time, quite high-tech stuff. It was using multiple projectors with a cassette tape that you put in with music. We also had a click track that changed the projectors. So I could create this tunnel with a mirror on one side and a screen on the other, with these colour photographs fading in and out of each other with a soundtrack of the fairground. So you had this, you know, this feeling of going into the booth. And then out the back, this isn't it exactly. This is just a kind of little representation of what I had in mind. It was using a lorry tarpaulin, mounting the black and white photographs on a lorry tarpaulin. So it was this, you know, lorries, big wheels, all of that was part of the life of showmen. So the idea was to go into this reality, the world behind the public-facing part of the fair. I put together that exhibition, and it was rather frowned upon by the lecturers at the time. They wanted to see nice pictures, in a gallery space, hung up and lit of whatever it was going to be, sort of models and fashion and food and all the rest of it. And here was I doing this sort of photography. So their choice of person for who gave out it wasn't a degree, it was a diploma at that time, and was the 5th Earl of Lichfield. It wasn't an accident that I was still dressed like I was painting my Fairground booth. I sort of profoundly disapproved of him as a choice to give away awards. So you can perhaps get a flavour of why I might have felt that from his quote on the right-hand side. He was very much from that kind of, one of his stories during the presentation was how he met David Bailey under the bed of a model. Wasn't that funny, and he were both trying to get off with this particular model. And it was kind of, it was a bit horrible. Bless him, he's gone now. But the photographers and the photography that I was interested in was not about that. It was about getting, was what's going on really for people in their homes, in their places of work, and trying to capture that together. As I said, that exhibition finished. The photographs went into a box. I tried to get some interest from to display them in different places and talk back to the Showman's Guild. Things move on. They weren't as exciting in those days. Perhaps weren't as thought of as different. There was an opportunity. My life moved on. After graduating, I was really lucky to get a job with a community arts organisation in Kentish Town in London as a young man. All of that was thriving around the country in that time, but particularly in London, a sort of alternative media organisations, community darkrooms that was going on. So it was moving away from me as the artist, me as the photographer, to how can I help you? How can I show you how photography works? Give you the facilities so that you can create your own materials. And really, that was where my life led after that. I became a community arts officer. I ran a theatre and an arts centre as an arts administrator. But it was all about how can I give you a space? How can I skill you up to be able to say the things you want to say? So I left being a photographer behind, and only have come back to that a little bit recently. So I was really privileged to be involved with this. There's some snaps there of helping people. The Young Feminist magazine, at that time produced Shocking Pink. It was a fantastic group of young women who would come in and use our facilities, produce their magazine. People recording their own records, making their own slideshows. And so that was really the career direction that I took after that. Where are we? As I said, it went into that suitcase, and it's still a bit stuffed with things at the moment, and has been dragged around with me all the different places that I've lived since. With a couple of pictures out of it that I valued and perhaps had around the house. And then it was actually in about 2016 that I first contacted the archive here. So I just retired I was working at the National Autistic Society. I was working as the head of their digital team there. So I'd moved into the internet, into that communication medium, if you like, that new communication medium. I was always using photography. I'd kind of get the camera out and all right, I'll take some photographs. And but using it in my work or using it for the organisations I was with, I certainly wasn't a photographer any longer. And eternally grateful. Rantzin and the team here took that information, and Andrew, who here somewhere did hours of work digitising it all, and lo, and how wonderful to have a Bob Chase archive here of these photographs and this work in